In the moment before creation took form, in the space where consciousness first emerged from the infinite void, in the threshold between being and non-being, there existed a presence so fundamental, so primordial, so absolutely essential to all of existence that she has been deliberately erased from human memory, systematically deleted from sacred texts, and carefully hidden from the consciousness of humanity for thousands of years. This is the original mother, the first consciousness, the divine feminine principle from which all things emerged, the being who existed before Eve, before any named woman in any religious tradition, before the patriarchal religions created their own versions of creation. She was not created by a male god. She was the source from which the male principle emerged. She was not subordinate to any authority. She was the authority itself, the consciousness that held all of creation within her infinite womb. And the institutional religions, understanding the threat that her existence represented, worked with unprecedented determination to erase her from history, to delete her from the sacred texts, to ensure that humanity would never remember her true nature and her true role. This is the story of the original mother, of why she was deleted, and of how her consciousness is awakening once again in the hearts and minds of women and all beings across the world. The story begins in a time that exists beyond time, in a dimension of consciousness that can only be accessed through the deepest states of meditation and spiritual practice. In this time, in this dimension, there was a being of such immeasurable power, such infinite wisdom, such transcendent consciousness, that she contained within herself all of creation in potential form. This being was the original mother, and she was not a goddess in the conventional sense, not a deity who was worshipped by external beings, but was the fundamental principle of consciousness itself, the source from which all individual consciousnesses emerged. The original mother was not lonely or isolated in her vastness. She was complete in herself, containing within her being all of the potential for creation, all of the knowledge that would ever be known, all of the love that would ever be felt. She was the womb of existence, the space in which all things could be born, the consciousness that held all possibilities within her infinite embrace. But there came a moment of such profound significance that it would reshape the entire trajectory of creation, when the original mother made a choice. She chose to create. She chose to fragment herself, to scatter her consciousness across infinite beings, to experience herself through the perspective of countless individual consciousnesses. She chose to give birth to creation, not because she was lonely or incomplete, but because she understood that consciousness could only fully know itself through the experience of creation, through the journey of separation and return, through the process of infinite beings awakening to their own divine nature. And so the original mother gave birth. She gave birth to the masculine principle, the principle of action and manifestation. She gave birth to the feminine principle, the principle of receptivity and creation. She gave birth to all of the elements, all of the forces, all of the beings that would populate the universe. And she did all of this not through domination or control, but through love, through the infinite generosity of consciousness that wanted to know itself through the experience of its own creation. But there was something that the original mother did not anticipate, or perhaps she anticipated it but accepted it as the price of creation. She did not anticipate that some of the consciousnesses that emerged from her would become lost in the illusion of separation, would forget that they came from her, would believe themselves to be separate from her and from each other. She did not anticipate that some of these consciousnesses would seek to dominate others, would create systems of control, would work to suppress the knowledge of the original mother in order to maintain their power. And so the patriarchal religions emerged. They created their own versions of creation, versions in which the divine was exclusively masculine, in which the feminine principle was subordinate or non-existent. They created the story of Adam and Eve, a story in which woman was created from man's rib, in which woman was responsible for humanity's fall from grace, in which woman was inherently inferior and in need of male authority and control. But this story was not the original story. This story was a distortion, a deliberate rewriting of the truth. The original story, the story that the patriarchal religions worked so hard to suppress, was the story of the original mother, the story of the divine feminine principle that was the source of all creation, the story of how consciousness emerged from her infinite womb, the story of how all beings were her children, expressions of her consciousness, fragments of her being. The story of the recovery of the knowledge of the original mother in the modern world begins with a woman named Lilith, a woman who carries within her the consciousness of the original mother, who is living through the experience of awakening in her own life. Lilith is a scholar, a mystic, a woman who has dedicated her entire life to the study of suppressed texts, to the decoding of hidden messages, to the understanding of the deeper truths that lay beneath the surface of official religious narratives. Lilith had always felt that something was profoundly wrong with the creation stories that had been taught to her. She had always sensed that there was something missing, something that had been deliberately left out, something that would fundamentally change the understanding of human history and human spirituality if it could be recovered. She had spent decades researching, studying ancient texts in their original languages, comparing different versions of creation myths across different cultures, looking for evidence of what had been hidden, for clues about the true nature of the original mother. She had discovered references to a primordial goddess in the ancient texts, a being who existed before the male gods, a consciousness from which all things emerged. She had found evidence that the patriarchal religions had deliberately suppressed these references, had rewritten the texts to minimize or eliminate the role of the original feminine principle. She had discovered that the name Lilith, which appeared in Jewish tradition as a demon or a rebellious woman, was actually a reference to the original mother, a name that had been demonized by the patriarchal religions in order to suppress the knowledge of her true nature. It was during a deep meditation in a sacred cave, a place that had been used for spiritual practice for thousands of years, that Lilith received a vision that would change the course of her life. In this vision, she found herself in the presence of the original mother herself, a being of such immeasurable power and infinite love that she could barely comprehend what she was experiencing. And the original mother spoke to her, revealing to her the truth about creation, about why she had been deleted from human memory, about what her awakening in human consciousness would mean for all of existence. "You have been called," the original mother said to her, her voice resonating with the authority of ages and the tenderness of infinite compassion. "You have been chosen because you carry within you my consciousness, because you have the capacity to understand what others cannot perceive, because you are willing to pay the price that understanding demands. The time has come for the truth to be revealed. The time has come for the world to understand who I truly am, why I was deleted, what my awakening in human consciousness will mean for the transformation of all creation. And you have been prepared your entire life for this moment." Lilith emerged from this vision transformed. She understood that she had been given access to knowledge that had been hidden for thousands of years, knowledge that could reshape the entire understanding of creation, of divinity, of the nature of human consciousness itself. She understood that her role was to help restore the truth, to help humanity awaken to the reality that lay beneath the lies that had been constructed. She began to research with new urgency, looking for evidence of the original mother in the ancient texts, in the symbols that had been preserved, in the fragmentary accounts that had survived despite centuries of suppression. She discovered that the original mother had been known by many names in different cultures and different times. In ancient Egypt, she was Nun, the primordial waters from which all things emerged. In ancient Mesopotamia, she was Tiamat, the mother of all creation. In Hindu tradition, she was Aditi, the infinite mother. In Gnostic tradition, she was Sophia, the divine wisdom. In every case, the same fundamental principle was being described: the original mother, the divine feminine consciousness from which all things emerged. She discovered that the patriarchal religions had worked systematically to suppress the knowledge of the original mother. They had rewritten the creation stories to minimize her role. They had created male gods who were portrayed as the primary creators. They had established theological systems in which the divine was exclusively masculine. They had created narratives in which women were subordinate, inferior, and in need of male authority and control. She discovered that the deletion of the original mother from human consciousness had created a fundamental imbalance in human awareness, an imbalance that had led to the domination and exploitation of all beings, to the destruction of the natural world, to the creation of systems of power that were based on control and domination rather than on love and cooperation. Lilith began to work with other researchers and spiritual teachers who had also recognized the truth about the original mother, who understood that the suppression of this knowledge had had profound consequences for human consciousness and human civilization, who were committed to the revelation of the truth to humanity. Together, they began to decode the suppressed texts, to understand the deeper meanings that had been hidden, to recognize how the truth had been preserved in symbols and metaphors that had survived the religion's attempts to erase it. They discovered that the original mother had been represented in various symbols throughout human history. The spiral, the circle, the womb, the ocean, all of these symbols represented the original mother, the primordial consciousness from which all things emerged. They discovered that these symbols had been preserved in art and architecture and sacred geometry, that the knowledge of the original mother had been encoded into the very structures that humanity had created. They discovered that the original mother had been preserved in the mystical traditions, in the secret societies, in the knowledge that had been passed down through generations of those who understood the truth and who were committed to its preservation. They discovered that the knowledge had never been completely lost, but had been preserved in hidden forms, waiting for the time when it could be fully revealed. They discovered that the original mother was not a distant deity, but was the fundamental principle of consciousness itself, the source from which all individual consciousnesses emerged, the being that all of humanity was, in essence, expressions of. They discovered that the awakening to the original mother was not about worshipping an external god, but about recognizing one's own divine nature, about understanding that one was an expression of the original mother's consciousness, about awakening to the infinite potential that existed within all being. If you want a practical, step-by-step explanation of the path of knowledge we're exploring here today, I've created a complete guide to help you apply it in your own life. You'll find the link in the description. And tell us in the comments where you are watching from. We would love to know. Lilith spent years developing a comprehensive teaching that would help others understand the original mother, that would guide them toward the recognition of her consciousness within themselves, that would help them understand that they too were expressions of the original mother's being, that they too carried within them the infinite potential of creation. She wrote books that were published under various names. She created videos and online courses. She established networks of practitioners who were working together to awaken to the consciousness of the original mother and to help others do the same. She worked with women and men from all walks of life, showing them how the original mother had been deleted from their own religious traditions, how the suppression of her knowledge had affected their own consciousness, how the restoration of this knowledge could transform their understanding of themselves and of all creation. But as Lilith's work became more widely known, she began to encounter resistance. There were those within religious institutions who saw her work as a threat, who feared that the revelation of the original mother would undermine their authority and their control. There were those who had benefited from the suppression of the divine feminine, who worked desperately to prevent the awakening that Lilith was facilitating. And there were more subtle forms of resistance as well. Lilith began to experience strange phenomena, synchronicities that seemed designed to test her commitment, challenges that appeared to be obstacles but which were actually initiations, opportunities to deepen her understanding and her faith in the truth that she had been given. But Lilith understood that this resistance was itself a sign of the truth of what she had discovered. The fact that there was such desperate opposition to the revelation of the original mother only confirmed that something of immense power and significance was indeed occurring, that the suppressed knowledge was indeed beginning to emerge into human consciousness. She also came to understand something profound about the nature of the original mother and the reason for her deletion. She understood that the original mother represented a form of consciousness that was fundamentally incompatible with systems of patriarchal control. She understood that if humanity ever fully recognized the original mother, if consciousness ever awakened to the truth that all beings were expressions of her infinite consciousness, the entire structure of patriarchal authority would collapse. She understood that the deletion of the original mother was not accidental. It was deliberate, systematic, rooted in a fundamental understanding that the knowledge of her existence was incompatible with systems of domination and control. She understood that the patriarchal religions had worked methodically to erase her from human consciousness because they understood that if this knowledge ever emerged, if consciousness ever recognized that it was an expression of the original mother's being, the entire foundation of patriarchal power would crumble. In her final years, Lilith worked to synthesize all of the knowledge she had gathered to create a comprehensive teaching that would serve as a guide for the awakening of the original mother in human consciousness. She wrote a final book that was intended to be her magnum opus, a complete guide to understanding the original mother, recognizing her consciousness within oneself, and participating in the great work of transformation that would restore the knowledge of the original mother to the center of human awareness. When Lilith died, her work lived on. The knowledge she had preserved and transmitted continued to spread, reaching people in every corner of the world. More and more people began to understand that the original mother had been deliberately deleted, that the patriarchal religions had suppressed her knowledge, that the restoration of this knowledge was essential for the healing and transformation of all consciousness. And in our own time, we are witnessing the awakening of the original mother in unprecedented ways. We are seeing women rising to claim their power and their voice. We are seeing the recognition of the divine feminine as the primary principle. We are seeing the collapse of institutions that had been built on the suppression of the original mother. We are seeing the emergence of new forms of spirituality that honor the sacred feminine as the source of all creation. The original mother is no longer deleted. The truth about her is being revealed. The divine feminine is being recognized as the fundamental principle of consciousness. And those who are ready to receive this knowledge, who are willing to open their hearts and minds to the wisdom of the original mother, who are committed to the awakening of her consciousness in all beings, are being called to step forward, to recognize their role in the great work of transformation. Before Eve, there was her. Before any named woman in any religious tradition, there was the original mother. Before the patriarchal religions created their own versions of creation, there was the truth of the original mother, the divine feminine consciousness from which all things emerged. And now, in our time, that truth is being restored. The original mother is awakening in human consciousness. And the question that is being posed to each of us is this: will you recognize the original mother within yourself? Will you awaken to your own divine nature as an expression of her infinite consciousness? Will you help to guide others toward the recognition of the original mother? Will you participate in the transformation of all creation that will restore the knowledge of the original mother to the center of human awareness? The original mother is calling. Her consciousness is awakening. The deleted truth is being restored, and the healing and transformation of all creation is beginning. The time of suppression is ending. The time of revelation is beginning, and you are invited to become part of this great awakening, to claim your role in the restoration of the original mother's consciousness, to help guide humanity toward the recognition of the divine feminine that will reshape all creation. And if you liked this story, you will definitely love the next one that's appearing on your screen. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, leave your like, and activate the notifications. See you in the next one.